impact of technology on the way that we live. Amber is an author, a speaker, and founder of All Things Between Humans and Computers. Please give a warm welcome to our first speaker of today, Amber Case.
Hello, everyone. Turn it down a little bit. All right. How are you doing? Yeah, are you awake? Kind of. I'm not awake at all, but I'll get there. I'd like to ask you, first off, if you've heard this quote before, that 50 billion devices will be there by 2020. I don't know whether any of these quotes are ever accurate, but they sell a lot of magazines and they sell a lot of trend research conferences, and people tend to like them. But every time I see one of these quotes, I like to ask whether this is actually a good idea. The original promise of technology was to free our time, right? To augment our capacity, to give us the ability to be more human. But it seems like technology is kind of a gas that expands to fit every available space in our life. And that's really difficult for me to handle because I really like technology, but it keeps getting more and more disruptive. So let's consider a few different pieces of technology. For instance, the smartwatch that kind of just replicates all of the things that you already have going on your phone. Or the concept of a smart fridge. I keep having these companies call me up and say, we want to make a smart fridge. And I say, oh yeah, so why do you need to make a smart fridge? They say, well, you know, you need to be able to remind somebody to pick up the milk and eggs when they go to the store. And I say, well, who doesn't pick up milk and eggs when they go to the store? Haven't we figured this out? We don't need a $20,000 fridge to figure it out. Or I want one of these thumbprint readers. Well, why would you need a thumbprint reader on your fridge? Oh, so somebody doesn't get into my fridge. It's like, well, you have a lock on your door that keeps you out. Why would you need an additional lock on your fridge? Once somebody gets into your house, you have a much larger problem than somebody in your house stealing all of your food. They're like, well, if you have a payment plan set up and you have different food profiles, maybe you can make sure you don't eat any sweets so you can be locked out of your fridge. I'm like, who keeps sweets in your fridge? I keep them in my dumb cupboard over here. It doesn't have a passcode. Maybe I should put a passcode on my cupboard. So I keep seeing these issues. Plus, people don't think about the fact that you could have this fridge get hacked into, and then maybe this fridge takes up more bandwidth than when you try to stream Game of Thrones or whatever you're trying to watch, because it was programmed really, really quickly. So when you put all of these together, you get what I like to call the dystopian kitchen of the future, where everything is written in a different language, different programming language, everything's on a different development life cycle, everything has a different alert, and everything somehow has Bluetooth. But of course, your phone can only handle Bluetoothing into one device at a time. So if you want to use your fridge and your stove at the same time, good luck. Maybe you'll have to have like an iPad over here and another one that handles that. But I don't want this future. It seems like when companies found that they made a lot of money off of selling more and more chips into mobile phones, they thought, well, let's sell even more stuff. Let's have this thing called the Internet of Things, where we unnecessarily put a bunch of technology into things, and it's totally unnecessary. This is my favorite example, this PetNet startup. So if you have pets, you know you can leave them alone and you can have an automated pet feeder. Well, this company decided that it would make an automated pet feeder that you could also Skype your animals through, so you could leave them alone for even longer and you could watch them through Skype. So the problem is that this was based on a remote web server, and so what do you think happened with this? What couldn't go wrong? What ended up happening is the server got disconnected and the cats and dogs starved. And people were tweeting at PetNet and they said, where's my cat, where's my dog? I can't Skype at them. The server's down. Are they being fed? And nobody knew. So, well, we're sorry. It's like when Twitter goes down and there's a fail whale, it's kind of cute, right? Oh no, Twitter's down. Maybe I'll have a nice afternoon and enjoy life. You're not doing that with this. This is not the right thing to do. So I looked at their terms of service and I said, wait a second, your one job was to feed the pets when somebody was away. And you didn't implement offline support. And they told me, yeah, sorry, we had a feature to implement offline support. A feature to implement the core thing of your product later? Really? And now it's, don't use this for critical purposes. You agree you will not rely on the services for any safety or critical purposes related to you or your pet. And the box says, there's no boxes anymore, so it doesn't really count anymore, but the box on the internet says, never worry about feeding or watering your pets again. You can rely on our services to help out your animals. I feel like there's been a blog post recently that says IoT devices should have warnings on the front. Warning, this is used to spy on your animals, but it also could kill them. Warning, this is an Alexa. It might not read you sometimes, and people can go into your house and order stuff on your behalf while you're asleep. Warning, you might be watching television, and you might get a bunch of unrelated orders because Alexa doesn't respond to just your voice. It responds to everybody's voice. There's so many things that can go wrong, but nobody seems to care about these things when they build them because we have to rush, and people got some funding, and then we're required to build these things. So we have this era of interruptive technology. Interruptive in the sense that all these devices are constantly needing our attention. They cry, and you have to pick them up and soothe them back to sleep. They get really hungry, and you have to plug them in the wall. We end up taking better care of our devices than we do ourselves. And then, not to mention, battery life is an issue, connectivity is an issue. Everything that can go wrong goes wrong with these devices. And so I tried to think, is there another way that we could interact with our technology? And I was writing my thesis on mobile phones at the time, in like 2007, and I found this term called calm technology, which is from Xerox PARC in the 1990s. Mark Weiser and John C. Lee Brown were sitting there developing a bunch of different concepts around what they thought the future would be. And they said the future would be filled with pads, tabs, and boards, which we have pads and tabs in our pockets. We have big boards up here. And they said at that point, we will have, at some point in the future, we'll have what they called ubiquitous computing, where devices will outnumber humans. Around that time, there was maybe one device per person if you were lucky and you had a lot of money. But at some point, the scarce resource in the 21st century won't be technology anymore. It will be attention. And how technology makes use of our attention will be the most important thing. They wrote these papers called The Coming Age of Calm Technology, and The World is Not a Desktop. And I really enjoyed the paper, The World is Not a Desktop, because it said, why will we still be building devices as if you had the attention of a desktop computer? With a desktop, you have full resolution display, you have infinite battery life because it's plugged into a wall, infinite connectivity because it's also plugged in through Ethernet, and you can sit there and assume that somebody will be focused. Yet, the technology that we're building now is, oh no, somebody has to download your app before they get through the checkout aisle, or they have an emergency and they need to make a call through your application. It's all of these compromised attention, battery life, and network connectivity issues, and yet we make applications that have so much that you have to download before you actually get to the functionality. We have things that take up extra bandwidth, more bandwidth than necessary. And we forget that most of the time on 2G and 3G, or when you're in the tube, things are not very optimal. So we have to design for unoptimal situations and assume that that's the norm. How many times do you have perfect network connectivity and great battery life and the ability to download a 50 megabyte app? And are you even happy when you download an app that size? Yet, it's really hard to make a smaller app because you have to include all these random libraries to make it work with a weird operating system, and it doesn't work on every phone. It's incredibly frustrating. So how do we design this technology? How do we design a calmer technology? The first principle is that you should design things that take the minimum amount of attention and not more than that. So technology should require the least amount of your attention and only when necessary. If you think about driving in a car is all about focusing your primary attention. It's all about remembering the variables of all the cars around you, and everything else is secondary and tertiary. You press a pedal, you don't have to look at that pedal to press it. You can use the radio button, you can glance back and forth with the rear view mirror to see the cars around you using your secondary attention. It's all focusing on that single task. But when you take your cell phone and you glance down at that, all the variables that you loaded into your primary attention just drop out. and you can't focus anymore. And that split second, that's the thing that causes accidents. So Mark Weiser had the example of a tea kettle. The idea of a tea kettle is that you set it, you forget it, you go to another room, and it's totally okay. You know when it's ready. And now people are making better tea kettles that just have like a little tone when it's done, because you live in a really small flat. People aren't living in these giant houses anymore. And so you live in this small flat and you need to have something that is getting your attention in a calm way, or even just a light that tells you when it's done. It really depends contextually on where you are. Technology should empower your peripheral attention. So again, you have really high resolution attention here. It's lower resolution around the side of your head. You also have the sense of touch. And people are ignoring this. We're so visually oriented that you forget that there's all these different senses that you can enable. This is a really silly example, but this is the LUMOBack smart posture sensor. So the idea behind this is that it just buzzes you when you have bad posture, but it's not buzzing other people. I like this, not all the time because there's a lot of false positives, but it's kind of like a little brother technology instead of a big brother technology. It's kind of watching you from below. But a better example is I had this employee and he had an insulin pump. And he was really excited to get this insulin pump installed. He said, I'll finally be normal, or I'll be a cyborg, but I'll have the insulin regulated and I'll be able to fill it up every once in a while. So I had a one-on-one meeting with him a couple weeks later, and he beeped. And he was incredibly embarrassed. And I said, why did you beep? Can you turn it off? And he said, no, I can't change the notification style. I'm stuck. So when he was at funerals or weddings or movie theaters, he would beep. And people would turn around and look at him as if he were incredibly rude because it wasn't the right notification. The right notification would have been a buzz so that only he received it instead of everybody else. But he spent all this money on the technology, getting it installed to look normal, to act normal, to be normal, yet he couldn't change the notification style. And then later, he'd be at like a loud concert and it would beep and he wouldn't be able to hear it. And that was life-threatening to him. So he ended up having to have a timer on his phone that would beep to let him know when he needed to fill up the insulin pump. Technology should inform and calm. You can do this through ambient awareness. Ambient awareness can come in a few different forms. The first one is you can have like a haptic versus an auditory. So just touch instead of a beep, which is the first example. This idea is just simply, you have a weather. Have you seen any of those videos about somebody living in a perfect condo and they have the disembodied computer voice that wakes them up in the morning and tells them about what the weather's going to be, and it's totally obnoxious and atrocious, and if they have anybody staying over, it also reads off their very sensitive information, like you have an appointment for tonsillitis and foot fungus, and the person's like, oh my gosh, can you turn it off? No, this is my disembodied computer voice that's helping my life out. You don't need to read all of these things. And plus, it's usually in these videos somebody has a perfect American accent and they live in San Francisco. So of course, the AI understands them the first time, every time, instead of having any sort of slight accent and it being impossible. So this was my old house. We thought, what if you had a weather report, but what if you had it attached to a light bulb? So you just attach a hue light bulb to the weather report, it changes color based on the weather, and then when you go into your kitchen in the morning, you can feel what the weather might be just by looking at the color. It's kind of an ambient awareness indicator. So I lived in Portland, Oregon at the time, which is pretty similar weather to here. It's usually gray and a lot of times rainy. So most of the time I'd wake up in the morning and this light would be blue for rain or just white for just nothingness, the bleak every day, which you understand. But this day, which I took a picture of, it was yellow, and I was so excited. It was going to be a sunny day, and I took a photo of it. It's the yellow day. And so there's a little iPad on the side. So you have a very low resolution indicator, and then you have a higher resolution indicator on the wall. So you can choose if you want to get more information, but it's not blasting you with high resolution information. So low resolution information first, give somebody a choice to have the high resolution information is going to be a much better user experience. This is all about making the invisible visible. What what ambient information do you have in your environment that's invisible? What indicators can you use to make it visible for everybody? That's not really about putting an augmented reality headset on. There's ways to do that's useful, but there's also ways to kind of embed information in your environment that makes it really nice for people to experience. This is another example. This is called the heat sink. This was from a research paper on ambient awareness. It's now you can now get it in a shower. So the idea is it's just an LED. It changes color based on the temperature. It takes what was formerly invisible or only touchable and uses concepts of synesthesia to transform that sense into another sense. So now you can see color, which you can see color. No, you can see temperature. Of course you can see color. Some people can't, so there's this one guy who has a thing where he can't see color, so he has a chip that's like associated with his head, and he can actually he can hear the color, and it blends with his sense, which is a really neat thing to do. You can like take something that doesn't work and associate it with you in a new way. This is a company that I worked with. The idea behind this is that it's industrial Internet of Things, which is fantastic. So you can take all these sensors and put them on machines on a separate network. So you can't control the machines through this. You can just get information out. And then you can take an iPad or you can take a heads-up display and you can start to see what's going on in a factory situation about what machine is going to go wrong first, what's the status of the machine. Also, if you get too close to the machine that's not working, it can switch into an exploded assembly model, and it can show you how to fix the machine in real time. And this is a really interesting concept because most of the time, we have the status of our machines or our servers in this really tiny dashboard. And this is about taking that information that's associated with a machine and putting it back onto reality, making it a sort of mixed reality, making a digital twin that allows you to have a feedback loop to improve something over time. This is where I think really good Internet of Things are going, is in industry, where people need this information in real time. You can save all of the effort of predicting when things will fail and actually put the analytics and statistics right back on the devices that you're trying to coordinate instead of having it be separated out in this little tiny information display. This is one of my favorite ones. You should you should amplify the best of what humans can do and the best of what machines can do. So humans are really good at curation, context, being weird, being inventive, being creative. Machines are really good at going through lots and lots of data sets and showing you a kind of pattern. Humans aren't as good at doing that. How many of you have played The Sims in here? Quite a number of you, yes. So The Sims are kind of interesting because you can have a person in a house and you can play it really fast. You can play it like 3 or 4 times fast or like 20 times as fast. And you can kind of start to see trends because you have this kind of godlike view. So for a while I was kind of like modeling my own behavior in a house and like moving the couch around and things like that to see if my relationship with my significant other would improve. It turned out that there was this couch in the way that our living room was set up, so I like moved the couch in this simulation until it ran really smooth, and then I took the couch and moved it in real life. I was like, this is like cybernetic feng shui or something like that. And it worked out really well. But I had this kind of removed approach that was aided by a machine instead of the machine determining where to put my couch for me. It's this feedback loop that works out really well. So oftentimes when you try to make a machine that acts like a human, you end up putting a human on pause. Anytime you have one of those systems where where you have one of those stupid phone systems where they say, please hold, or like try to make you dial in all these numbers. You just press a button trying to get to the operator the whole time. The more automation that happens, the more important customer service is going to be. This is my friend Todd Huffman, and he made a machine that scans tissue samples. He noticed that all of these postdoctoral scholars in biology and chemistry were sitting there in labs, taking two-dimensional tissue samples, preparing them on slides, scanning them in. They were wearing out their vision, wearing out their hands. They weren't doing any cool experiences or experiments. And so he said, well, I'll just make a robot that does it. So he made a robot that takes a three-dimensional tissue sample, scans it, cuts it with a diamond knife, scans it during that time, and then he has a system now where you'll be able to, as a doctor, see whether, you just put in an input. Did this end up being cancer or not? What kind of cancer was it? And now it's doing pattern recognition that allows you to predict whether cancer is going to show up in a sample or not. But it's not that it's doing it all on its own. Even though this is 1,500 times faster than a human and frees up all those humans to do real experiments and figure out the things that computers can't do yet, the main thing about it is that it's working alongside people in this feedback loop. And when a lot of people talk about AI, they talk about like the science fiction version of AI, that there's like this container that has no relation to anything else, and so it doesn't evolve over time. But as we go from a very more mechanical society to a more organic society, we have to think more of these biological systems. When you get a cold, you don't die. But when a server gets hacked, like all the information goes away. We don't have antibodies. Like we need to think of more biological ways and more systemic ways to deal with this information and to build these systems, or we'll get in really big trouble. Technology can communicate, but it doesn't need to speak. How many of you like the disembodied robot voice that you get on an automated messaging machine? Any of you like it? How many of you like C3PO? How many of you like R2-D2? Okay, some of you like some of these things. Well, the issue behind C3PO might know 2,000 different languages, but he's annoying in all 2,000 languages. And R2-D2 might not know just a tonal language, but R2-D2 is adorable in all of those languages. You kind of know universally what R2-D2 is feeling. And that's the key behind trying to make machines talk. When a machine talks to you in a disembodied human voice, even if it sounds really human, the expectations that you have for it is that you can communicate right back at it at that same level. But if it's just a lower level device language, like universal tones and beeps, you don't have to translate into a bunch of different languages, and you kind of understand how to communicate with it. My favorite example is the Roomba vacuum cleaner. This robotic vacuum cleaner just goes dun-da-da-da when it's done, and it just goes dun-dun when it's stuck. And you're like, oh no, it's stuck, I have to help it. And it's adorable, and my cat rides around on it, and I can get karma on YouTube by videotaping it. This is great. This vacuum cleaner isn't very good. I mean, it doesn't even clean the corners of your house. But people love this thing, you know? And it has just a little light indicator that says whether it's okay, and if it's not, then you're helping it. If you had any of those Tamagotchis or Pocket Pets before, the reason why they were adorable is because it didn't do everything for you. It was a helpless piece of technology. You needed to feed this thing all the time, and so it wasn't terrifying. And this is one of my favorite pieces of technology because they understand that if you used a disembodied human voice, it would be really, really creepy. It would be horrible and totally unnecessary. Plus, you'd have to translate it into a bunch of different languages, which is not, that's just too expensive for most companies. And they'll do it really wrong, too. Technology should consider social norms. So 15 years ago, we started to have these phones with cameras in them, and that was terrifying to people. We had all these articles, remember that privacy was dead. Now we know that we use phones to just take pictures of our food before we eat it as like a pre-digestive ritual or something. But these norms change over time, and whatever the norm is right now is totally invisible. So anything on that norm, you all have phones with video cameras in them right now. Pretty much everybody in this audience has a video camera in their pocket. It's not a big deal. Anything below that norm line that changes is restorative. It restores you to that accepted norm. Right now, the norm for a lot of the world is to have something with connectivity, to be able to access the web, to have a cell phone, to have a way to take photos. This is kind of the new norm. And then anything above that is fear-inducing. And that's the problem, is that it's not equally distributed and not everybody has that superpower yet. So past, you had a desktop computer, and the desktop computer, you could do pretty much everything with it. So early on, we had many people sharing one computer, many people sharing time on a mainframe computer. Bill Gates would sneak out of his house at 3 o'clock in the morning to use University of Washington's computer, because that's the only time he got on a schedule for it, and nobody wanted to use it at 3 in the morning. And so he got this like early time on this machine where barely anybody could use it. And then almost everybody started to have these desktop computers in their houses, but they didn't have network yet. So everything was on finished software. You had to finish your software because you had to load it on a CD-ROM, and it had to be pretty good by the time it got there. And then maybe you'd have an update every year or 2 years. And then we started to store most of our data in the cloud. And it's really weird how much of you is stored on the cloud and how much of you is managed by random third-party companies. And so when hackers come in and hack your data, they get access to everything. They get access to 500 million Yahoo accounts. So what if we had the data that was stored with us first, and when we used a service, it shared the data with that service for like 2 or 3 minutes while you got something done, and then that new data was stored back to your phone or back to your personal device. If we thought of our devices more as personal servers instead of these like remote machines that, again, we're time sharing on in the cloud, that way, when a hacker attacks a site, they're only getting access to the accounts that were shared with it for the last 2 minutes or the last 15 minutes instead of the entire thing. I find it ridiculous that every company now has to manage user data in a really, really great way, when in reality that's not what the core of all these companies are. They're not there to protect your data, they're there to provide you a service. It's going to get worse and worse over time, and we have to think of flipping the model in some way. I was hoping personal servers would start to show up now. There's a few different efforts like IPFS, the decentralized web that you can follow, but we're not exactly there yet. We're not to a point where instead of Netflix sending us a bunch of the same video every time we request it, we should be able to get information from other people around us, kind of Napster-style file sharing, but we don't really have that yet. We just have an extreme waste of bandwidth that's totally unnecessary. Technology should work even when it fails. When an escalator fails, it just becomes stairs, right? It's not too terrible, it's still really annoying, but you have to consider that everything that you build will fail. What happens when it fails? How elegant can you make it when it fails? Because this is going to be the default state for some people, is that it's usually going to fail and it's going to be incredibly frustrating. So instead of saying, here's the best case scenario, always solve for the worst case and solve for things that you don't expect. The example with a person with an insulin pump, you don't know what situation this person will be in, so allow the alert style to be changed so that they can adapt it to their situation. You just don't know what situation it's going to be in. Allow somebody to choose the alert style. If you process as much as possible on the device, then you have the least amount of network that you have to grab from. And that will increase the user experience for people. It's hard to do because it takes longer to build applications, right, and to build them well. And oftentimes, you're going up against people who say, oh, we need to get this out the door really fast, but it ends up being more expensive to support. When I ran a startup, there was a large company that came to us and said, can you port your software to our new proprietary system? And we'll pay you like a couple $1 million. And at that point, we had raised like $100,000, so this was ridiculous. And so I looked at the offer and I said, no, we can't do that. And like our 10 investors were angry, all our employees were angry, like everybody was mad at me. And I said, well, they asked us to do something for their system for $2 million, but over the course of the next 2 years, we would spend $5 million building and supporting that system. So we'd end up losing $3 million and it would bankrupt the company. And they were like, are you kidding? Like, this is a really great opportunity. And thankfully, you know, we didn't do that. And the company and its products ended up getting canceled after a couple years. And so we dodged a bullet. But it's really hard to think longer term when so many people are panicking about, you need to implement AI and all these different things when they don't even really know what it is. It's just this like hype cycle thing that's going on. It's really hard to resist that sort of thing. So if a good design allows you to get your goals in the least amount of moves, then you could think of calm technology as getting you to your goal with the least amount of attention. And it's really hard to do that. And who wants to be a system administrator to live in their own house? It doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, we need to be able to be humans again. There's this Greek concept, two different kinds of time. One is chronos time, and one is kairos time. Chronos time is the idea of this kind of industrial time. I have a meeting from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. with this person, here's the agenda. Once it's 10 a.m., well, we have to go. It doesn't matter if we're in the middle of something, it's the next appointment. And then there's kairos time, and kairos time is like, you're sitting in front of a sunset, you had this crazy idea, it's romance, you got married, like your kids' first steps, like these unmissable, amazing moments of reflection or even boredom or losing track of time. And the problem is that like a lot of innovation and weird things, unpredictable things happen in this kairos time, but every time we're on our phones, there's all this chronos time that's constantly interrupting us. So how can we like take back some of our time and be more human? Our primary task shouldn't be computing all the time, it should be being human. And if our attention is constantly being taken up, put your phone on airplane mode on default, like try not to answer your email constantly. Try to take some of this time back so that you can actually ask yourself, like, what am I doing? What does this actually mean? Like, why am I sitting here in front of this machine? I could be doing something else. And it's really hard to do because, again, it kind of just expands to take up every part of our life. But I want to remember the original promise of computing, which was to free up our time so that we could be more human, to augment us and work alongside us instead of trying to do everything for us and making it work on that. Anyway, so the quote that I skipped by, so the idea is that the primary issue here is that anyway, Mark Weiser had this concept that, look, our attention is the scarcest resource. So if you take away nothing from this talk, attention is scarce, use it well, design things to focus on attention, and there's a book on this, and there's another book on sound and how it affects you, because that's another issue. You don't want to hear everybody's Outlook notifications all of the time because they're obnoxious. How to design things better. And then I also have a website where I grabbed a lot of the research from Mark Weiser and John Seeley Brown, and I put it on there to show how well-written and beautiful and prescient this information was. It was created in the 1990s when we didn't have ubiquitous computing. Mark Weiser died in 1999. He wasn't around to talk about any of these things, and it was really upsetting because he didn't even get to see the era that he predicted and how messy our lives would become, and even have a voice in trying to clean some of this stuff up. So I'm just trying to carry along that message into the era that we have now, which is Internet of Things and ubiquitous computing. So thank you very much.
Questions? You do need them via Twitter, preferably. So in the next talk, if you feel like asking a question, please do send it via Twitter to the guys, and they'll pass them on to me. However, I have written down a couple. So at the end of your talk, you were obviously talking about humans potentially having a little bit more time. In the last 15, 20 years, there's been various kind of illustrations of what utopia might look like and where human society is going to go. And it looks really calm, and it looks like people have a lot of time on their hands.
Yeah.
Where do you actually see it potentially being in the next 10 to 15 years?
How many of you have a lot of time on your hands? All right, so I think that, well, utopia originally means no place. It was a make fun of these perfect utopian societies that people want to make with like these great political structures, this kind of one-size-fits-all idea. I think we have a mild dystopia. It's not enough that we're super annoyed, but you can go on a plane, but you have to wait in line, and like there's annoying people next to you, and like you can have the web, but it doesn't work all the time. It doesn't work that well all the time. You can have the ability to call anybody, but it's not like the reception will be that great. So I think our original idea of the future is usually aimed at people who have a lot of money. So again, those like little advertisements of the person waking up in San Francisco in the perfect condo with like all the clean clothes, and they don't hear any trucks driving by. It's like, no, the real world is messy, it's full of noise, we're constantly getting taken away from what we're doing, we have health problems, like it's not a utopia. And so I think if we have the technology that works well in our lives and there's less of it, we won't be stuck into these really messy systems where like things kind of work, but they don't work that well all the time. So I think like the promise of computing to like augment ourselves and sit alongside of ourselves is completely failed. But we can kind of work on fixing it. Eventually, people might get paid more for making products that take less code and take less bandwidth. Maybe there'll be competition on like things that work well with the environment instead of against the environment, because at some point that will be profitable. But we haven't hit that point yet. It's still really great to make things that work on people's attention and advertising revenue. So for some of these other products, like if you watch like, if the Philips Corporation, like they make these products that kind of evolve alongside people and work well with people's lives. And that's a much better place to be. But it's a complicated future, and it's not what we intended. Plus, who wants jetpacks anyway? That would be so noisy. Like if you actually had something strapped to your back, like that would be like 110 decibels. You would go deaf, and you'd have to use asbestos to insulate yourself from the flames. And you probably get 5 minutes of it, and it would like take crazy fuel and be incredibly pollutant, and like you'd run into buildings. So I don't even think the future that was proposed is even that good of an idea to begin with. So we have to do with what we have. It's not that great, but that's okay. I mean, you're all happy, right? Like relatively, like we're doing better than we were before.
And I actually thought, when I watched Rocket Man as a child, I thought that was the most amazing thing ever, but, wrapping myself in asbestos might be a little bit weird. Taking that into account, and with all of I don't know how everybody else feels, but I certainly feel that with all of these different technologies, whether it's from self-driving cars to people trying to, create rocket packs and devices that you stand on and that can fly over water and things like that, and whether it's anything in your home or smart fridges and whatever else, there's obviously an acceptance curve of when these technologies become so normalized that they actually do become part of your life. But when do you think, or what core technologies do you think that will be accepted sooner than others? Which is a broad question.
Yeah, I think the technologies that we just don't notice anymore, those are the successful technologies. And all these big companies keep trying to make some of these technologies work that just won't work. Like we had the SMALT, this intelligent salt shaker. Did anybody see this thing? It was horrible. And the Juicero, where it's like, hey, we'll apply some pressure and squeeze out this juice packet that you can do with your hand. Why would you do that? The smart salt shaker was actually a Bluetooth speaker with some salt shaker built in. And you could connect to it and have this really bad, can you imagine? I mean, hey, please pass the salt. Oh, I'm passing you also a giant boombox, and now the sound is traveling from one part of the table to the other, covering up all the conversations along the way, and then I'm gonna shake this and shake the speaker, and so suddenly like the shaking of the speaker is like making the sound distortions, and then I've got to pass it around. Are you kidding? Why would you associate audio with salt? Like, who does that? Like, this doesn't make any sense. There's this account, can I say this? Like, Internet of Shit, you should follow this on Twitter. It's really good. It's about all of these things that go wrong. But I think this, this vision of the future that we have is if you have enough money, you can have a good time. You know what people do with a lot of money? They hire actual, physical, real people. I would love to have somebody who I sat in a room and all day I would just transcribe to him or her, and they would type down things, and they would be really great because they went to a school where they learned how to edit and they're like a professional writer. But instead, you have things like Dragon Naturally Speaking or Siri, which understands you kind of, and then you end up having more work to edit these things down, and you just get really like lost in it. It turns out that when you have a lot of money, like real people are actually really fantastic. I think the mild dystopia that we're going to have is that we might have automated things, but I think the real lie of it is that we're not, a lot of us are robots ourselves. Doing unnecessary tasks, number one. Number two, when you have an automated checkout counter at a grocery store, or you have like an automatic check-in system at a hotel, it's just offloading the work to you. Instead of having somebody who knows all the like little codes for the bananas and the oranges and the apples and the grapes and all the produce, you have to memorize those codes, or you have to look them up. And so you have one person kind of babysitting everybody and helping them out, but it actually ends up taking a lot longer. Like, I love seeing somebody in the supermarket that, like, I know that they've worked there for 20 years, because you see, like, the produce slide by, and it's like, you know, and they're like, yes, like, they're really good at what they do. They kind of, it's not maybe that they like it, but they've mastered it, you know? And so now all of that, you know, flight searches, all these things are, like, back on us. That's not real automation. And, like, when I go into self-driving cars, the car is not really driving itself. I'm babysitting the car as it tries to figure out the world around it in a confused way, and then it beeps at me when it's really confused and I have to take over. So it's kind of like nerve-wracking. Like, it's like watching like a 12-year-old learn to drive. It's like, oh gosh, don't go over there. Like, let me take over, you know? So I don't think, I mean, my mom's job was automated. Back in the 80s, she was a master control operator at a TV station, and she left for a few years. She came back. Her job was completely automated. And she watched a computer do her work, so she's just babysitting. Like, I don't want to see a bunch of jobs where we're babysitting some technology we could have done a better job at ourselves. We miss the, like, joy. And I think one of the other things is that, you know, it's been proven that the longer you take to do a thing, the harder it is to do, the more joy you get out of it. And if, like, everything's so quick, Twitter and Facebook and email, we don't get any joy anymore about, like, how hard it is to write a letter, and so we abuse it. We just send too many texts instead of, like, the right amount of text. We don't phone call anymore because that would be terrible. You'd have to commit to a phone call, you know, not be distracted at everything else. So I think there's this issue where, like, if we're babysitting a computer that's doing the real work, then we're just a robot sitting there, you know, attached as a brain to a system, and we miss out on the kind of joy of producing a thing, which is why the artisanal movement is so important now, like why people are actually saying, well, I want to make something, like I want to grow food, I want to physically be attached to a thing with an uncertain outcome and a timeline associated with it because it's real. And it's also why people in tech, if they make a lot of money, they go out and they become farmers. So, like, I was never able to touch the thing I built, and now it's a piece of code that I plant in the ground, and it's really stable, and it grows, and I don't have to program any of that, I just have to water it. This is great, you know. So I think there's a lot of things that we'll have to deal with. I think the future is expensive, and it's going to be really hard to afford. So if you can do anything, like, make sure you save your money and be really careful, because I've seen a lot of people just get, like, eaten by this kind of curve. And when you're at the kind of a lower class status, the technology turns against you because you can't update something as quickly. If the new norm is that you have to keep buying the technology and you can't afford it one season, like, you're going to have, you know, your brain is stunted in a way that you couldn't predict, you know, and that really freaks me out most of the time. So this is a very dystopian answer.
Thank you very much, Emma.
Yeah.
Cheers, thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Cheers.